Sound check is not a rehearsal. Rehearsal is not a sound check. They're two different things. Sound check is for the sound operator. Rehearsals for the band. It's also a time for the sound man to optimize the mix and get things tweaked while they're rehearsing. But sound check is really to optimize the mics, gain setting, EQing, that kind of thing. And don't spend 20 minutes on any one thing. If you're going to communicate to the people what you're doing, let them know. Get a talk back mic, might help, as opposed to yelling. You always sound like you're mad at them when you're yelling at them. So get a talk back mic.
He's always yelling at us.
Like a normal human
We got
being.
our in-ears in. We can't hear him.
So take it away, guys. Let me know your take on sound checking.
Yeah, sound check is definitely for the operator, and in the situation that I was in, you know, I was lead on the sound check, of course. The audio engineer is lead. And when I was done, I got through it in about 10 minutes at most. I mean, that was a long sound check. And when I was done, I said, all right, you know, worship leader, the stage is yours. And he went off with rehearsal.
So what were the keys for people making it so concise and so efficient? How did you manage that?
Well, it's obviously a team collaboration training, you know, and everybody eventually got the routine. Yeah, I think it's just talking with your team and getting your own system dialed in.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree. Yep. The over time, people just get used to it. It's like, oh yeah, this is what we do every week. At first, you know, maybe the first couple of months, if you have a 4-week rotation, it's going to take a little bit of getting used to. But once you do it, you get to the end result a lot quicker when you do a sound check.
Yeah.
It's just the bottom line, you know. It's like, and the other thing I would say is that it's very important for the leader who's on stage, whether that's a worship pastor or a volunteer worship leader, you need buy-in from them. You can't just decide on your own, hey, I'm going to start doing a sound check every week and then tell them the day of. This is a conversation that you have in order to, have the whole team have buy-in so that everybody's on board. And so, but I think it's one of the most effective things that you can do preparing yourself for a great mix.
Yeah.
Is to have,
I think there was, sorry.
Oh,
I think there's, you know, I lost my thought.
Oh, no. The other
Go on.
thing I would say about sound check is that that's different than a line check. You should also be doing a line check as an audio engineer so that before anybody arrives, you make sure that every input is working that's on stage, whether that's a DI, whether that's a microphone, make sure everything's working, because you don't want everybody to show up and all of a sudden 3 of your microphones aren't working and you have to troubleshoot, everybody's standing around. So make sure everything works before you show up. So I would say that there's a difference between line check, sound check, and rehearsal, but there's definitely a difference between sound check and rehearsal.
Yep. I would add one more thing. You limited it to audio stuff, line checking. But as a sound guy who gets blamed for everything, I would also make sure that the coffee machine and the lighting work.
Absolutely. Make sure. Yes. And you know that coffee is the fuel that drives us in the tech booth, so you need that.
And you might even want to put extra money in the plate, because sometimes the offering has not been sufficient and they blame the sound guy for bad sound, which is why the offering wasn't up to snuff.
That's that church division thing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You know, there's an old adage, you're talking about routine and forming habits, right? And I was in a church recently that hadn't done a sound check in 8 years.
Wow.
They didn't think they needed one. They wondered why the mix was so bad.
Oh my goodness.
So we started
drive me
teaching about
insane.
a process where people stop playing and listen to one mic at a time, right? Don't do, like you were talking about before. Don't be playing your paradiddles on the drum while I'm trying to hear the guitar, please.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the keys for us, is respect for the other musicians who's sound checking.
Right.
Good.
But, you know, I had a 40-piece orchestra and a full band, praise band, and choir and everything. I mean, we got through sound check in about 10 minutes. You know, set monitors. Yeah.
But
it was so efficient.
When you're an expert like you are.
Well, it was a long journey to get there, though. That's what I guess the point I want to make.
The journey always starts with two steps.
Yes. So don't stop believing.
Oh man, I like it, Michael. I like it.
Okay, guys, mono or stereo?
If I were to choose,
Yeah.
stereo whenever possible.
Stereo.
Why?
Go ahead, Michael.
Is it my turn? Okay. Well, stereo allows you to separate the instruments so they're not standing on top of each other. Even vocalists. We'll do the vocalists for instance. Let's say you have 4 vocalists on stage and you have a stereo rig. Even if you pan those off 10, 12, 13, 15%, you're going to open up the frequency spectrum of what you're hearing. It's going to be a lot cleaner because they're not walking all over each other.
How does a choir affect that? Like, how would you approach a choir, Michael, in a stereo setting?
Well, let's say I got my 80 voice choir. I got a stereo rig. I got 4 microphones. I would pan the left one hard left. I would pan the right one all the way hard right. And I would pan probably the middle to 25% or so. So that gives me kind of a full stereo spectrum there.
Yeah,
It's very similar with drums as well. I'm sure you guys do this too, where you have the tom, in perspective of the audience. I would pan. There's debate on drummer perspective versus audience perspective, but I
really
always do audience.
Only for musicians, though. Really.
Yes. Yeah. The audience doesn't really care, but I always pan the top tom right and the bottom tom's left. So it goes across the speakers as you're listening to it.
Yeah. And what I love about the stereo setup as well, that you're not going to get in a mono setup, is like if I'm doing a keyboard, right, and there's a left right coming from my keyboard, if I pan those fully left and fully right on the 2 inputs that are coming from the keyboard, it actually not only does it open up the frequency spectrum so that things that need to pop in the middle of the mix, like a lead vocal, kick, snare, are going to be present. But what it does too is that it gives you all the motion from the effect of the keyboard. So say that there's, arpeggiation and different things happening within the sound of that Nord or whatever keyboard you're using. It's going to translate to your stereo system and feel like an experience versus just being kind of straight down the middle. And so, and the same thing with stereo electrics. I've met tons of guys, they like to do stereo electrics, so I get to pan them left and right. And now you have all the digital gear, right? What are the most popular ones? You have the I'm drawing a blank, but your
main stage? Is it?
No, the guitar rigs.
Guitar rigs. Yeah, the Kempers.
The Kempers, right? All of those.
Helix.
Yes, the digital stuff is really starting to sound incredible. And Lincoln,
it does. It sounds good.
The Line 6 stuff, Lincoln Brewster made it sound amazing. But, you also are going to pan those left and right, and you get this amazing spectrum of sound because you're in a stereo system versus just a mono.
Right. And with your effects too, you can give depth a lot easier. So if you want to push something back in the mix, you put a little reverb on that, and you get a stereo reverb that's left and right. You can get that real spatial depth.
Yes.
The thing I liked what you said first was about opening up the center, which requires less EQing when everything's standing up on top of each other. Right. You're going to make so many cuts and things to make the vocals stick out, like with guitars and keyboards and stuff. But if I have stereo, I can push that thing off to the sides and leave the vocal alone. The other thing is, we're talking about in-ear monitors. One of the biggest advantages of in-ears is stereo mixes. Yes. I mean, you can do in-ears with mono, but it's not the same. We're always, even if they have Aviom or some ME1 or some personal monitor mixer, I always go in and check where their panning is for their mixes. And 9 times out of 10, everything is dead center.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they want to get a better mix. I bring the volumes half down to start with across all the channels. And I start panning things. But on the stage, I won't pan them like a front of house guy. I'll pan them like they see them on the stage. Mm-hmm. So if the keyboard player's to my right, I might want them in the left speaker.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? If I look over here, there's the keyboard player. and he's coming out of my right ear. So I try to do things for in-ears along that line too. Stereo's the greatest for monitor mixes, and not
Yeah,
only
even
isolating sound away from loud sounds, but man, the whole naturalness of a stereo mix makes so much sense.
Absolutely.
well, and we're coming up to a new technology too with immersive audio, which is a whole nother discussion.
Yeah,
But that basically,
what's the L-acoustics rig that does that?
Elisa,
Yeah, Lisa.
yeah,
We
and
also have
EDW and Martin Audio and all those guys have their own version of it as well. But it's basically mixing in groups. I think they call them objects, but
object motion detectors or something.
probably a little
We also
more
have
deep
Clang
than we want to get.
Fabrique, which is the in-ear immersive thing.
Yeah,
Where if you go to the demo on YouTube for Clang, put in a regular stereo pair of earphones in your computer, and they'll take the lead vocalist and they'll swing him around the right side
Yeah.
on the back side of your ear, and it's crazy.
Wow.
They
you can
flip
download
it-
the app and do the
they can
demo,
flip
and
it
it's
here, put it around. It's
amazing.
nuts.
Clang is great stuff.
Wow, that's cool, man. So everybody go and do that.
So let's talk about the challenges of mono, though.
Okay.
Well, I loved mixing in a mono setting for a long time. Sometimes it's the right solution for a room. I know Gateway, when they moved into their new space, I think they've changed it since then. I'm not sure. But I remember reading an article. It might have been in like Church Production Magazine, but when they moved into this new room, I don't know if it sat like 3,000 or 35. I forget the number, but they ended up going with a mono system. And it was really interesting to hear about why they wanted to do that. And the advantages of a mono system is that everybody's going to experience kind of the same thing, given the room, the acoustics. Obviously, there's a lot to consider there. But when you're in a mono system, you're going to pretty much impact everybody the same, because you're not going to be trying to split things into one speaker or another. Right. But some of the problems I got to come up with a mono system is that your mix is going to sound a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Boring.
Flat.
A little flat, a little boring. Yeah, it's going to have less depth, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not going to be as open. And so to me, whenever possible, I'm going to mix on a stereo system, and that's going to kind of be my go-to. Because a mono system definitely is going to feel more cluttered. It's going to feel more cluttered.
Well, it's going to be more important for the musicians to do their part and not step on each other, is what it's going to do. You're going to have to take it back to your fundamentals.
Yeah.
And your musicianship has to really listen to each other.
Agreed.
But there are some rooms like we do here in West Michigan. We got how many A-frame churches, that honestly require a mono speaker array, and it just fits the room better.
Well, and some of those churches aren't doing full band. They're doing an organ and a choir. Yeah. And when it comes down to that, like, do you really need a stereo system? It would be amazing, but you don't need it in order to have an engaging experience in that room.
Yeah,
but even with a wide audience, or the half round, it's great to get a stereo rig in the center at least and cover 80% of your audience in stereo and be able to do side fills.
Yeah.
Sure.
We take that approach quite a bit.
We do.
But yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Recognize what the room needs. Necessary to recognize and correct what the space does to the sound system in order to optimize the PA's performance in the venue. Got all these different materials, different ages of structures, portable spaces, fixed spaces, half round, fan shaped, vaulted ceilings.
I worked in a church where it was all the way around 360. So there's that too.
So you get all kinds of challenges with this, like in the church and up in the left-hand corner there, it's a liturgical church. It's probably historically registered as a site. So there's only certain things I can do that won't affect the aesthetics. So different types of speakers have been designed for these kind of spaces, you know, steerable arrays that blend into the architecture.
Mm-hmm.
But this is probably more of a traditional church, like you mentioned before, piano, organ, choir, pastor. And you get into this portable space on the right, and now it's just like a rock concert, setting up for a regional concert.
Sure.
You know, I can do just about anything I want, but I'm limited because I might not own the space. So I know of companies now that are actually making portable acoustic solutions to set up to prevent, like, if you're in a gym, preventing some of the reflections, laying maybe some carpet down, some rugs down, using padded chairs instead of, you know, a folding chair.
Metal. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So you have to think about a lot of different things. Somebody who comes into your church and tells you, we're just going to put this sound system in the way your church sits, and it's going to be perfect. Okay, show me how. You have to pay attention to the room.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I love about digital mixers now is some pastors used to be so concerned about putting front of house on the floor. And when churches are up here on the balcony. But now with remote control, iPad control, you know,
Sure.
guy could be anywhere he wants to be. Mixer doesn't have to be there.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that you brought that up. Yes. So technology has helped in that way where you're able to hide a lot more. But I remember back in the day, we would always have that kind of like, how dare you put the sound booth on the second floor? Or how dare you put it behind that piece of glass even, right?
You know how many seats we could have here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually went to Midland, here in Midland, Michigan, Midland Center for the Arts, and I mixed for an artist out of Nashville there. And sure enough, you know, it's a performance space, but it's also theater. And so I'm up on the second floor, up real high behind this piece of glass, and they open up the window, and I'm supposed to mix that way. But then they come to me and hand me the iPad. They're like, okay, we got the iPad ready for your input. So I'm able to go on the floor and do sound check down there and really get accustomed to the room before the event. Doug, I love that you brought that up because that's a game changer.
Yeah, it is. Even for monitors in our little church, the sound guy used to run all the time up to the monitor, if you're not using in-ears, and listen to the talent next to the monitor, and then try to remember what you heard. You run back to the board. How's that? Nah, sounds funky. Run up again. And now you give a kid or an engineer an iPad on the stage. I'm back in front of house doing monitor check, and he's standing next to them, and he's just adjusting things right where they're at.
Right.
But Doug, you just ruined my exercise routine. You see, I'm gaining, man.
I'm gaining up. Distributed delay systems. So people don't understand the concept of the speed of sound versus the speed of light. Speed of light's 186,000 miles per second. Sound is 1,130 feet per second, or roughly 1,000 feet per second, or 1 foot per millisecond, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm standing 6 feet away from Christian, who's speaking to me, it's actually taken 6 milliseconds for his voice to hit my ear. It's so fast, but it's still 6 milliseconds. It's not instant.
I mean, I could get a shot off in an NBA game in 6 milliseconds.
Right. So you've got a church that's, let's say, I don't know, 80 feet long, deep.
Right.
And you're trying to use 2 speakers to get level to the back of the room, which means I got to crank these things up so much that I'm killing the people in front, and the people in back maybe hear it. So what do? Oh, I'm going to put 2 more speakers back there so they hear that too. Then I can lower the volume of the front, and the people in the back can hear. But you forgot one step. You didn't delay that other set of speakers. Why do I have to delay them? Because if you don't delay them, you're going to hear the sound immediately, and then 40 milliseconds later, you're going to hear the sound again.
Yeah.
Yep.
You hear the
So
reflection.
you've got to delay them so that it sounds natural and the time arrives in the natural time it would normally take to get there. And if you do that right, and the levels are set right, and the timing is right, nobody even knows they're on.
Right. You don't actually even hear them.
Yes.
I mean, you do, but not subconscious or
Right.
consciously.
Not in
Yeah.
an intentional way where you're like, I hear
Not
that,
intentionally.
I hear this speaker, now I hear that speaker.
Sometimes we've had to turn them up a little louder so that you know they're on because people paid for those.
Yes.
I don't know they're paid
So
for.
true. That is true. I've had
Don't
pastors come up to me and
don't
say,
forget to set the delay. Don't forget to set the delay in the foyer where the screens are.
Right.
Because they're watching the screen, and then they're going to hear this thing immediately, and then 100 milliseconds later, they're going to hear it come through the wall.
right.
Yep.
Even
Yeah.
on most digital consoles now, there's actually a delay for the headphone amp on the mixer. So that guy can actually delay front of house headphone mix from the stage.
Yep. I would do that.
So
Yeah.
people don't understand the concept of phase at all in the audiences that I speak to. You got to explain it to them. What
Moral of
phase-
this, yeah.
Well,
Moral of the story is sound is super slow,
Yeah.
and we
It
have
is.
to
It is
we have to
super
tame it.
slow and it is cranky. I would say
Yes.
it's cranky. I love one thing I want to mention here is about the in the slide you have the sub delay to the mains, and so Michael, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Why would I want my subs to be delayed to the mains, and why is that important?
Doug, you want to handle that one?
I'm throwing you a curveball there, man.
Yeah, I know, man.
I actually went to a church recently and did that with Brad on our team. Brad Angus is one of
Yeah.
our designers or our engineers, and we actually tuned the room together, and it's really important for say your kick drum, for example. You don't want the kick to be hitting your main at one time and then hitting the
Mhm.
sub at a different time, because then it's gonna have like that flutter effect. And so you want to make sure that they're time aligned to each other so that it has the most impact in the room.
Yeah,
Right.
and with the sub, I mean, you got to pick a point in the audience too, because
Sure.
you know
Yeah.
you're dealing with different wavelengths and different arrival times, so the mathematics get a little challenging to explain on this. But
If you're using something like Smart or something like that, sometimes that if you're capable of knowing how the software works, you're capable of lining those things up very accurately.
Right.
But in a simple situation, this is a very simple system here. I got delayed, back fills. I've got some delayed front fills. Here I'm delaying the sub because it's that far in front of the mains.
Right.
Mhm.
That's all.
Yeah, that's
But
physically
if I
in
had an
front of it.
array that was 60 feet above it,
But that
I'd want
happens.
to, I'd want
Yeah.
to align it to that too, right?
That
So-
happens though. We run into that a lot when we're doing installations, and we have to take all of that into account, so to speak, right? Because we want to give the best system. And again, we do have Smart, we do tune rooms. So if you guys ever need help with this, any listener, anybody listening out there or watching, we can come alongside you and help you in this process, and actually also teach you that as well, so that if you want to be self-sufficient and maybe get your own smart system, we can show you how to do that very easily.
You there?
Yeah, we're here.
Yep.
So I was going to say something. The phone rang and I lost my train of thought. Now I'm on the same page with Michael.
It's a fleeting thought.
Delay is important, and I don't think enough people understand it. In the old days, we had to use a tape measure and buy a delay to put on the speakers that we wanted delayed. And now, again, another advantage of digital mixers is all those delays are on the outputs. They're also on the inputs.
I never
Mhm.
thought about that, man. I never thought how they did it back in the day.
So on any bus, you have a delay on it. And even on some consoles now, even like some of the inexpensive digital boards are out there, they have input delays. What's the input delay for? Let's say I was a singer, lead singer, and I'm 6 feet in front of the drums. Well, I could delay my vocal mic 6 milliseconds to the kick drum.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Yeah, I actually do it
Everything
on.
lines up.
I use an inside kick and an outside kick. Well, those are about 8 to 10 inches apart. I put 1.3 millisecond delay on the inside, and it lines right up.
I'm going to go on a rabbit trail here, because you just blew me away. I never thought about how they did audio systems back in the day with delays. I just never thought about it. So you're
Yeah.
telling me that you used to hang speakers, throw a delay on it?
Yeah.
That is, I never thought about that, Michael. This is blowing me away right now. It makes me think about like bands who probably didn't get, I mean, they were famous, but they didn't get their just due because of the quality of sound systems they had back in their day. Can you imagine if the Beatles played on an acoustic sound system?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, Paul McCartney has the pleasure of doing that today, but the Beatles cohesively, they never got that experience in a stadium or an arena,
You didn't even have
like you
stage
two
monitors.
did, for example.
Yeah.
You didn't even have monitors.
No, they didn't.
There was
No,
no
it's
such thing as a front of house console. It was a Shure
Yeah.
Vocal Master with volume knobs on it.
no, and then what used for the mains is like when the Beatles did their show at Shea Stadium, all they used was like the little PA with the little horns that they
Yeah.
had.
They did have some ground stack bins, and they had some Shure vocal columns
And they
too.
had a
out
bunch
in
of
the alley.
Vox, yeah, bunch
I
of
believe
Vox.
the story goes is that the screaming girls were louder than the PA anyways.
Yeah,
Nobody could actually even hear them.
Right.
cute
But
story.
what's interesting is that when you hear a recording of that night, they were spot on. Their harmonies were right there.
Oh yeah.
Their
Insane.
timing was perfect. They watched Ringo's arm on the ride for their tempo. You know, they couldn't hear it.
Hear it, but it was on time. I think Ringo said, if you ever saw the documentary 8 Days a Week, I think he said he would watch like John Lennon's like butt or something or his leg or something in order to stay in because he would just be moving to like whatever the tempo was.
Twist and shout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like dong 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 dong. My wife actually went to go see NSYNC when she was probably in middle school or something like that, and she said she could not hear the whole concert because the girls were going crazy, and you couldn't
Oh, that's
louder
funny.
than the PA. So it still happens to this day, which is crazy in my mind.
That's funny, man.
Hmm.
Where you put your speakers is important. You know, a lot of small portable churches will just set them up wherever they want. If you get them away from the walls, you're going to have a much more appropriate response with your speakers. As soon as you start putting them near a surface, you're going to get boost of the bass frequencies by a lot, depending on how many surfaces are congruent to it. So you look at the corner here, it's on the floor, it's got two walls. Same thing happens if you're on a ceiling with two corners. You're going to get a lot of bass boost. So think about using your high pass filter for your outputs. It's okay. Calibrate your room. We talked about that with Smart.
Yes.
People out there listening, these guys are great. Invite them to your church, have them look at your system. They'll evaluate it. They'll tune the room. They might even reposition some speakers. They're not going to necessarily try to sell you a whole new system. They'll probably try to make what you have work better. Believe me, these guys are good.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love doing that. I actually 2 weeks ago just did a training here in the state of Michigan with the church, and we had about 16 people there, and it just went fantastically. I get so much out of that, and Doug, I know you do as well. You speak at conferences all over the country, and that's actually how we met. And that's actually how I cut my teeth, is by Doug inviting me to these events and saying, hey, be a part of it and also learn. And so I'm forever grateful
I
to
forgot
you.
to leave that out in my resume that I was your wet nurse. But
Oh man. Yeah. You could do that. No, but Michael, I know you get the same sort of experience. You just
Absolutely.
love to do this. It's not just something we do that because it pays the bills. We have the actual pleasure of being able to do what we love and also make a living from it as well. And so, yeah, we
I
work.
love seeing I love seeing the light bulb come on in people's faces when you show them a new technique.
Yep.
Like, oh, well, then I could do this and that and that.
right.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
Listen to the system and the environment. Use program material songs you're familiar with. This really gets down to the bottom line of just, I think if you're going to be an audio operator, I don't care if it's monitors or front of house or a broadcast mix, whatever, listen to as much music as you can, turn the TV off, spend some time not just tapping your foot to it, but trying to critically deconstruct what you're hearing. Where is that panned? Why does that vocal sound so in my face, but the background vocals are so far away? How do they do that?
Mhm.
Is that a steel string or a nylon gut on the guitar?
Oh, so good. I
Is
love
that a
it.
snare
Oh,
drum?
yeah.
Is that a piccolo? Is that a deep dish brass snare? Is that a wooden
Yeah.
maple, birch, walnut? What is it? What kind of cymbals are those?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that a
Piccolo.
Hammond? Or is that
Yeah.
some funky Farfisa or Vox organ? What is that thing,
Yes.
right?
I love it.
Piccolo's coming back, by the way.
Well, I mean, even the intricacy of something like a grand or a baby grand or an upright, those are all going to sound different. They're all going to react different.
And how the room, again, when you're recording, the big, great recording studios that aren't anymore weren't necessarily chosen for their mic locker or their console. They were chosen for their rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Hit Factory in New York. I don't know how many drums were recorded in that room. Not there anymore.
Not there anymore.
Oh, I can get that sound in my bedroom with
Yeah.
and with plugins.
Sure.
Sure you can. Go for it.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. I love and I've seen countless engineers do this. I used to be I probably still am the most annoying person in the world because I would just want to be there. You know what I mean? Like I don't even have to talk to you.
Yeah.
We've talked about this previously. Like I would just be a magnet to somebody like Lee Fields. We were bringing Lincoln Brewster and a few times actually, and then we would see him on the road as well when we would go to the Experience Conference. I remember the first year they were there, Lincoln Brewster was there, and so we got spent time with Lee then there as well. But he would always be tuning the PA with a certain playlist that he had. And he just loved playing Remember the Time by Michael Jackson because he knew what he wanted to get out of the PA for the set that Lincoln was going to do. And that was a part of his repertoire, was just knowing what to get out of the PA. And so he would play certain songs. So again, it's understanding what the end goal is, understanding the space that you're in, and understanding what you're going for, you know. And not all of that is decided by just the audio guide. That's the thing too, is that going back to your very first slide, that this is relational, it's collaborative, right? So when I make decisions at the console, I'm thinking about what the worship leader told me they were going for.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the culture
Yeah.
of our church. I'm thinking about the demographics of the people who attend, right? So I'm not going to mix at 110 dB, but I'm also not going to mix at 85 dB because it needs to be in a certain place, and we're going for a certain thing. So there's so much to take into account there. And so listening to the system and listening to your environment and understanding what the vision and the goal is, what the win is very, very important.
Lee Fields and Lincoln are both friends of mine. Lincoln probably closer to me than Lee is because I've known John Mills. I've known other sound guys that worked
John
for
Mills
Lincoln
is
before
amazing,
Lee
by the way.
was there. But Lee has the advantage of having a guy named Lincoln Brewster who's not only a world-class guitar player, but a world-class engineer.
Yeah.
Yes.
He would take his wireless guitar, go out front of house and go, Lee, a little dip on that there.
Yeah.
Boost that a little bit. You know, he mixes and masters.
Tell me how hard that would be to mix for, you know?
Exactly.
But look what a relationship is. That if he can
Yeah.
submit to that and say, I'm on your team, I'll do what works best for you. Imagine if more worship leaders were able to go to front of house and talk to their techs like that.
Yeah.
It would be better.
Yes. It would.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It would be.
Yell at 'em. Hey, you don't know what you're doing, you jerk.
Well, and if we have worship leaders that approach you with grace and humility, along with tech guys, you know, doing the same thing. I got a chance to mix Lincoln one time, so I interacted with him and stage audio. I mean, it was the way that he was able to communicate, you know, and it's not to single him out, but, you know, he came with grace and humility on his requests. It wasn't a demand, you know, it was a collaboration effort.
Was it a conceited, arrogant approach?
Not at all, you
Never
know.
like that. No, I've never known him to be like that. And I equate this. I don't know. I got a picture in my mind when you were saying that, Doug, about the more worship leaders being able to come back. That's like going to your hairstylist, your barber, and showing them a picture. This is what I want my hair to look like.
Right.
It's the equivalent of that. This is what I want this to sound like.
Can we not talk about hair right now?
Yeah, I was gonna say I can't do that.
Me too. We can talk about facial hair.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh,
Nice.
there it is. Tommy
You just-
Bahama.
yeah.
Cables, connections, adapters, and DIs.
Oh yeah.
I went to a thing called Connect in Toronto. It was a tech conference, and they had Tech Olympics. One of the games was they would take two guys and they'd duct tape their right arm behind them, leave their left arm free, and they would have to run a mic cable up to a mic stand 50 feet away and connect it to a microphone with one hand. That's not easy.
That is not easy.
And
No,
then
it's not.
Then they had to gaff tape the cable with one hand back. And they were timing these guys. It was a round robin tournament, and it was hilarious. Things are falling over. Guys are tripping. They can't get the thing in the mic, so they're using their teeth. It was hilarious.
Oh.
The next event was they had all these adapters in a box, and you had to reach in and identify it without seeing it. This is a mini 8 stereo.
That's
And
how,
Oh, that's great.
Prizes away like free microphones and free stuff. It was so fun.
that is fun. This sounds fun.
So tell me what these adapters do.
All right. Well, I think starting from scratch, I think obviously we need to talk about cables, XLR, quarter inches, right? And understanding the differences between some of those cables. But one of the things that just stuck out to me, I mean, I cannot avoid seeing that JDI radial DI box in the middle of the screen.
Good
And
green stuff right there.
yeah. We talked about microphones. We talked about how important those placements are. But I would say for instruments that you're going to plug in, your DI is super important to the signal flow. And always, when possible, I know that everybody is committed to a budget in some way, fashion, or form, right? There's only so much money. But when you can, it's so important to spend a little bit extra on things like DI boxes or connectors or cables even. I think that it goes a long way. Michael, what would you say about that?
Yeah. Good cable, good connectors. You know, I'm a fan of the Whirlwind stuff. Seems to be industry standard, I guess. But you know, you're gonna pay a good premium for good cables. So
Yes, you are.
I would not go to the Amazon, you know, get 12 pack for $5 XLR. I mean, you're asking for trouble there.
Yes.
Good
Well-
DI boxes is evident, man. I'm a bass player myself, and there was a time when I joined a small worship team. Actually, I'm playing tonight on that event. And the first night I played, they gave me this really junky DI box, and my guitar sounded. I actually, it was the first time I played that guitar on stage. I thought there was something wrong with it. You know, it sounded terrible. It was thin. And then the next time I was on, I asked him to get me a different DI box, and it immediately came to life with a radial.
Right.
And it's not to single out radial, but a good quality DI box will make your instrument sound correct. You know, and so will cables, of course.
Absolutely.
But,
So I guess the idea of a direct box, some people don't even know what it's used for. What would happen if I tried to take that acoustic guitar's output and go 50 feet to the mixer with it?
you're probably going to blow the preamp.
Yeah, or it's gonna sound so thin
Mhm.
Yeah.
because anytime you have an instrument cable, I think about 15, 20 feet past that, you're going to start picking up RF and you're going to lose high frequencies and gain.
Right.
So the DI, a lot of people don't know what it does, but I'm just telling your listeners, I know you guys know.
Yeah.
Oh, go
It
ahead.
transforms that high Z output into a low Z balanced line level output. So that I can go long distances with a mic cable, plug it into a mixer, and have gain and no noise.
Yeah.
So even if your mixer is close by on the stage or something, I would still suggest getting a DI box because it's going to maintain the integrity of your keyboard, your electronic drums, your acoustic guitar, whatever you're plugging into it. So,
Now, another thing I would say, Doug, about just adapters in general is I will avoid them
yeah.
as much as
Yeah.
possible. Avoid them. If you need an adapter for your headphones to go from 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch, that's fine. Something like that is fine. But when you described it earlier, Doug, you have like 5 adapters in your chain because you don't have the right cable. You should just buy the right cable.
That's right.
And it's going to
Yeah.
solve so many
Just
of your
buy the right cable.
Yeah.
I see people using a 25-foot cable to go from here to here. Why don't you just get a 5-foot cable?
Yes.
The longer your
here-
cables are, the more
Preach.
it's going to affect your signal, right?
Let's take it a step further. How about we learn to solder?
Yeah.
Ooh, nice. Make your own cables.
Make your own cables.
Let's go a step further. Let's learn how to weld.
Yes. Let's weld. Let's build our speaker cabinets.
Let's get into woodworking.
Radial and Whirlwind and other companies make cool things too that, some people take the computer output from like a mini 8 stereo right to the mixer with RCAs or 1/4 inch or something. There's actually boxes that will optimize the output,
Please
balance it, noiseless. They're worth the investment.
especially
Especially doing loops and things like that. I mean,
there you go. That's what I was
yeah.
going to mention with loops and everything going on. People using iPads on stage for their
Right.
loops or a laptop of some sort. It definitely comes in handy to have those DI boxes. I absolutely agree.
Or the Pro Presenter computer, go ahead and get a USB to audio interface
right.
Yes.
for that 1/8 inch.
Yes.
Tame the stage. I don't know who's using wedges anymore. A lot of people are using in-ears now. But if you keep the volume on the stage at a minimum as much as you can, it's going to help your overall front of house mix. You don't need a Marshall stack. I mean, even Lincoln Brewster might have one on stage, but it's a placebo.
Right.
It's just for show. I remember the first Eddie Van Halen concert, I got to sit with the monitor on stage in New Haven. And I don't know how many stacks of cabinets he had, but only one of the cabinets had a speaker in it. And it was off stage.
Right.
Yup.
I saw the Newsboys at Creation Festival. Again, stacks of amps. And not one cabinet was loaded with anything. They just had lights on the heads. And he was using Mainstage, oddly enough. He wasn't using Line 6. He was using the $39 Mac program for his guitar sound.
Yes. Wow.
They're going, oh, wow, look at those stacks.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I think AC/DC was the real thing though.
I think they were too. I was going to mention though, coming off of your last slide, you don't have to go there, Doug, but talking about DI boxes, if you are going to use, because if you're not going to go digital and you guys are purists and all that, I believe there's a place for that. And you're going to have your amps isolated somewhere. There is a DI box. The one that we use was made by Radio, which allows for a
The
long.
SDI?
Yes.
Yeah, the SDI, yeah.
Exactly. So that way you can have a long connector, off stage somewhere, and you're not going to lose sound quality.
Yeah, it transforms high to low, then it does it opposite when it gets to the amp. It's really a cool thing.
Yeah.
ISO boxes are cool too if you want to tame the stage. The best one I've seen is the Rivera Silent Sister, it's called.
I haven't seen that.
And the reason it's the best is because he's got like a labyrinth of tubes in the thing.
Huh.
So when you have like an ISO box with a mic right in it and you shut it, the volume of that space is really reduced. But what he does, he keeps the volume like it's in a big space with the area that this thing has to go through before it actually arrives at the output.
Oh, that's cool.
Just really, it's more expensive than like the Randall or some of the other ones are out there. Some people build their own, put like a box with foam in it.
Yeah.
But he's got 2 places for microphones, multiple mics. It's really a cool box.
What's it called again?
The Rivera Silent Sister.
Okay. I'll look that up.
Yeah, just stage plots are generally important for planning too, especially if it's a new band or a new lineup of worship team. that's never played there before, you might want to get some advanced notification from them what they need, how to set it up. So when they show up and you've done your line check, everything's kind of right in the right place.
And for anybody out there who's not using in-ear mixes at this point, feel free to contact an integrator, to contact us. It's really not that, I mean, technology is coming down so much in price that it's really worth your time to, if you have a full band on stage and you have a small room and you're always battling with stage noise, you know, give us a call. We can definitely help you with that situation.
Yeah, I just had a church in Africa call me, and they were of the opinion that they needed wireless in-ears for everybody. They don't have any money. And I said, no, you don't need that. Well, what do you suggest? So I showed them some really budget-conscious earphones that aren't just crap.
Right.
You know, I won't mention names, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
And I told them about headphone amps. And I said, you can, if you have powered wedges on your stage right now, you can actually take that cable out and put it into one of these headphone amps, and you get the same mix. It might not be stereo, but at least you could put an earphone in it. There's some companies like Rolls who actually make monitor mixers. So you put your instrument, your mic in it, it feeds back to the PA, and then you have level over your instrument and your mic. They're like $100. So you can get into in-ears very affordably, and a lot of people don't realize that. They think they need Avioms or wireless or whatever.
Yeah.
And you don't. So, and make sure you watch that YouTube link for this next slide. Great mix requires a great arrangement. If the band is overplaying and they're not listening to each other, they're not self-mixing, good bands will self-mix. You ask a good audio engineer who's been with a band for 5 years what he's doing with this particular band, he says, not much, because they're doing everything.
Right.
Turning the faders
a
up.
band that doesn't know each other, that rehearsed 10 minutes this week before the service, that's a fight.
Yep. Especially if they didn't listen to the songs beforehand.
Or if they're not even, if the worship leader is not taking the time to direct.
Yes.
Look, I have 3 guitar players. Hey, Johnny, don't play the first verse. Oh, you don't like it when I play, huh? I love when you play. I just don't want you to play right now. Take some authority, okay? Drummer, I don't want fills all the time. I want kick and snare. And bass player, line up your bass with his kick. Keyboards, I don't need more rhythm. I got 3 guitar players. Give me a pad.
Yep.
You're the glue. You're going to hold it together.
Yeah.
Vocals, I don't need unison. I need some harmony, some creative things, maybe some oohs, some ahs. You don't have to always do the words. You know, there's not enough worship leaders who are directing.
Let me play devil's advocate. So every church I've worked at, I've always had a great relationship with the worship pastor, right? Somehow I always become best friends with these guys, right? And they're still friends to this day.
Good.
But how would I approach that conversation? Say somebody who's an audio engineer, guys, this is both for the both of you, is listening to this podcast and they're like, oh man, that makes so much sense. I need to have a conversation. How would you approach that conversation? Because there's 2 factors here. There's creating new habits, right? So you have to change the way that you play, right? So the way you're playing is not right. So that's number 1. But number 2 is also that you need to have some the leadership conversation, right? So how do you have somebody who's a volunteer or maybe, you know, support staff go to somebody who's a pastor or a leader and say, hey, I think this might be a really good idea? How would you approach that conversation?
Well, it's like anything. Anytime you want to become closer to somebody in a relationship, you're probably going to invite them somewhere outside of work to like have a cup of coffee or a cookout or something and say, I got some ideas, whether or not you think they're valid or not, I'd like to run them by you. And this has been my experience. I'm not really an engineer, even though I'm teching right now. I grew up as a musician. I played in bands all my life. So I have some perspective of that. And when you play in a band as a way, I made a living playing in a band. We couldn't just go out there unrehearsed. We'd never get any gigs.
Right.
But so we had to learn our parts. And then even when we learned our parts, we had to pay attention to what the rest of the guys were doing, because maybe there was some lagging. Maybe they weren't quite there with their part yet. which is a whole different story. But I'd get together with coffee over with them, and I'd say, I want you to listen to this video I'm going to show you and show you what happens when people are playing anything they want to undirected. And then I'm going to play you Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, where everything was kind of written out. So everybody knew what part to play at what dynamic, at what tempo, and what key.
Yeah.
And not the whole orchestra played every note of every bar of every bit of the song.
I love what you're saying.
There was parts where they would lay out. All right, so we're going to break down like the gospel church, and it's just kick and bass. Not everybody's playing. They have 18 musicians on the stage, and they're all kind of just like doing their thing. And then they come in one at a time, like Tower of Power or whatever. You know, it's
Yeah,
you
man.
have to have arrangement. Now, here's where it helps the tech. If I know that you're arranging your band, that you wrote notes on, like the intro, I just want the acoustic guitar on the intro. I want all of you to lay out on the first, but that's not what they did on the record. I know, but we're coming off of a song where we all finished on a high note, and I'm trying to make a little bit of a breathing space. So now what we're going to hear is the acoustic. And in the first verse, it's going to be acoustic and vocal. And on the second verse, I want the drums and the bass to come in with a keyboard pad. And on the bridge, I want the drums to do a double time thing, okay, with the bass. You write these things out, whatever the notes are.
Yeah.
You give them to your musicians, you rehearse it that way because there's actual direction for the song, and you give those notes to the tech. Why would the tech have those notes? Wouldn't it be nice if I knew that the first verse was just going to be acoustic guitar? What could I do with the mics? Mute them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, in the first verse, I'm going to unmute the vocal.
Yep.
My system's cleaner. There's no feedback, no ringing open mics. Everybody's on the same page. The music sounds like it's being made by one band, not by 16 musicians. It's kind of like mixing with inputs and groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You're not going to step on each other. And you know what the overall result is going to be? You're going to record it and play it back. And what's the difference between last week and the week you tried an arrangement is going to be so amazingly night and day different. You're not going to want to go back.
I love what you
Yeah.
said about the Beethoven thing, man. Like everything there is pre-planned, pre-arranged, premeditated, right? But there's always the argument, oh, but we want to be organic. You can still be organic and make room for that
Sure.
within the space of pre-planning.
Right.
And so yeah. So tell me a little bit about this link real quick, Doug. Like what are people going to see at this link?
They're going to show Don Moen, who's, you know, arguably one of the most well-known worship leaders, at least from a long time ago.
Sure.
You know, we talk about modern worship. Modern worship could be, you know, Elevation. It could be Chris Tomlin. It could even be the Gaithers to somebody my age, right? So,
Yeah,
but
for
Don Moen has all these great players and they're young players. He's got like Tom Lane, who's Matt Redman's guitar player, Lenny LeBlanc, who's written all these songs. And they play a song of his as it's supposed to be played. And then he describes what would happen if the musicians were left to their own devices and everybody was playing just whatever they wanted. And it's horrible. When everybody's listening to each other and self-mixing and realizing what the song needs to support it, it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So as an encouragement to all audio engineers out there, it doesn't all fall on you. I think there is sentiment to the garbage in, garbage out sentiment where it's like you can't fix everything from the console. Part of it has to do with the talent.
Do I have time for one short anecdote?
Yes.
So I got hired by a church to fix the sound guy because he needed healing. And they thought I had like some spiritual power where I could lay my hands on him, on his ears, and he would automatically be well, right?
I love it.
I said, well, you know
Wow.
what I'll do? I can't do that. I can, if he needs help, I'll maybe be able to find some things that I can help him with. But why don't you let me just come to a service and listen, see what's going on? Okay. Worship leader was adamant. He knows that, you know, the guy needs help. He has a heart for the guy, but the guy's no good. And we know our band is great. So something needs to give here. So I go in and I listen. And he runs up to me and he says, so what do you think? Can you help him? You know what? To tell you the
Oh,
truth,
no.
you didn't do a bad job. And he was incredulous. He goes, what? I says, yeah, your band stinks. I
Oh,
says, and he can't fix that. Bye.
wow. I love that though, because it's true.
It
That
is.
can
The
happen.
sound man's going to make a bad band better. That's like saying a microphone can make a bad kick drum sound better.
Or a good vocalist sound better.
You said it before. It's the source. So I've got all these sources, but combined, they sound like one giant bad source. And how am I supposed to fix that?
Yep. Have a
Now, a
conversation.
bad sound guy can
Have a
really
conversation.
a good band. I agree with that. But the opposite can also occur.
Well, and we have these tools now called virtual sound check where you could record that rehearsal and say, "Hey, Mr. Worship Leader, will you sit down with me for an hour and we'll listen back and you tell me what you think."
That's
Yeah,
so
and
You know?
then you get into the other thing about, okay, so I've got sound guy A on this week. I got sound guy B on this week.
Yeah.
C on this week. And Michael's the expert, but this guy's almost there, not quite. And then I got a guy who's a novice. And the congregation is subjected to maybe the same worship team who's listening to 3 completely different mixes. Now, you have scenes and stuff like that, I imagine, but in the old days, you didn't. So what we would do in the old days is maybe get them all together with the band and say, Timmy, you mix. Let me hear what you got. Louis, you're up next. And you do peer review and
Yeah.
try to get the mixes to some consistency so the congregation isn't subjected to these wide swings of differences.
right.
Yeah, and likewise with that virtual sound check, you sit down with your team and the worship leader, you
Right.
know.
Or your
Yep.
lead pastor too.
Well, yeah, whoever
Yeah.
needs to
Or
benefit
even
from
this
that.
little handheld recorder that I have, I could put that in the room and record the room and just play it
Yeah.
back and say,
Yeah.
you know, this isn't off the board. This is like a pair of ears in the congregation. This is what they're hearing. Do you like it? Ugh. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to fix
Yeah.
that? I don't have to be the judge. And in terms of telling somebody some ideas I have, if it's that difficult to have a conversation with somebody that you're working with, then that's a different conversation.
Totally.
You know, you don't make friends in the workplace. You make them outside of the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I like
And
that.
so having coffee together, maybe every month, every time you can get together, talk about things, debrief. Hey, Doug, you got any ideas about how we can do this better? Yeah, Lou, do you have any ideas you can do to make it better for me? Can we work together here? I don't know. Goes back to the first slide, like you said.
That's good.
It's awesome.
EQ is a volume control, so probably a good idea to cut before you boost. If you don't know what that means, talk to Michael and Christian after the video.
Absolutely.
If you're gonna
Yeah.
boost gentle, you don't need big boosts. Like I said, EQ is a volume control. Where your volume, your fader is affecting all the frequencies. When you turn up a high, a low mid, or a high mid, whatever it is, you're actually changing the gain structure of that band of frequencies. So be careful with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, in regards
Yeah.
to EQ, I would say that just like you said, wider to me is always better because I like it to sound natural. I don't want it to sound so so much like I perform surgery on this piece of or on this source, right? And so the wider bands that you use, the more natural that the sound is going,
Mm-hmm.
you know, be represented.
And take out the garbage first, which is
Exactly.
subtractive EQing.
Yep.
Try to find the offending frequencies, and there's techniques for that. I mean, you can basically, like for a vocal, take your lower mid, upper mid, boost them big, and sweep while they're singing, and you're going to hear something that sounds god awful.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's the offending stuff, and you want to take that out. Just don't forget to maybe narrow it a little bit so you're not taking too much out.
Mm-hmm.
And
Agreed.
if you're boosting too much on anything, you probably got the wrong mic.
Probably true. Or you needed to have a conversation with the source.
Yeah. I don't care what mic I use on that drum. It's not going to sound good, man, until you put a new head on it.
Mm-hmm. Or tune it.
Yeah. So we don't have to take time on parametrics. Parametrics are selectable EQs. They divide into typically 4 bands, unless it's an output. Parametrics might have 6 bands or more. But typical channel EQ has 4 bands of frequencies: low, low mid, high. And what you're able to do is, like a radio dial, tune it into the frequency you want to affect and boost it or cut it. And parametrics differ from semi-parametrics in the fact that they have Q, which is the quality of the bandwidth, which means I can make it more narrow, surgically pull things out like a filter, or more wide.
Good stuff.
Good.
We talked about that. We talked about it with the leave fields in the room. Have music that you're familiar with. Develop your ears. Some good resources for that are Quiz Tones and Hear EQ. They're going to help you learn what frequencies are, what timbre is, what level differences are, like between 3 dB and 12 dB. What are those differences? What's the difference between A440 on a trumpet and A440 on a violin? That's timbre. Same frequency, but timbre is produced by the instrument based on what it's made of, how it affects the sound. Is it plucking a string? Is it bowing a string? Is it hitting a string? Is it hitting a head? All those things. And they're cheap. Tones is $2 on your iPhone. $2.
Yep. And I can't stress the point that you made before that. You want to do some things to, familiarize yourself with frequencies for sure. And that's more of, like, I would say, the science behind it and familiarizing yourself with that. But then I would say, don't ever lose the listening to music side. You always remember that it's art. We are dealing with art. And so if you're not familiar, especially with modern music, for a lot of churches, they're heading into the space where they're modernizing. But the way you mix, you need to know how to mix different genres of music is my point. So if you don't listen to country, you should if you're an audio engineer. Not for pleasure, but to educate yourself.
Right.
If you don't listen to hip hop, you should. Right? Or dance music like Hillsong Young and Free and Mosaic. They're replicating a lot of those hip hop or dance elements. And if you need to familiarize yourself with those sorts of genres in order to mix them well, because that's going to be totally different than your typical, rock and roll set, for example. And so I would just say, make sure that you're always keeping it musical as you're doing things like Quiz Tones or Hear EQ, any one of those resources. They are fantastic. You should absolutely do them and train yourself. But remember that what we do is music. It's not just science. Because some people
have some listening parties with your buddies.
Heck yeah.
That's always fun.
When I was growing up, we had vinyl and speakers, and it was a social gathering.
Yeah.
The vinyl on and listen to the record from start to finish.
Yep. Front to back, man.
Yes. The best. And it was funny because that's when we started experimenting with moving speakers around and seeing what would happen when that's the problem with a lot of young engineers. All they listen to is this.
Yep.
They don't listen to enough open space speakers.
They're missing out.
They are missing out.
Big time.
Even in a stereo format, you get a Class A amp with a turntable on thick vinyl. There's nothing like it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I try to do it at least one.
That's what I got right there.
It's the best.
Yep.
We talked about that, record your services, so
Yes.
We'll move on. I have some resources to help people, many more than this. If you want the slides, I'll include a list of resources that you can download, and they can always talk to you too about all the resources that you have, but I'm easy to reach, doug@worshipmd.com.
Rock on.
Yes, absolutely. Is that the end?
Is that it?
Is that it, Doug?
We've been on for 3 hours. I mean,
No, well, Doug, you are an incredible resource, and we plan on having you again on the podcast because you're such a great resource. Your knowledge, your experience, and just the way you're able to connect with people, I think, is hugely needed in our community, and why you've been so successful, I think, however you define that success, but your platform is so important in the industry. And so I'm so grateful for you. So reach out to Doug if you have questions on these things. You can find him at Experience Conference coming up. I think you're also going to be at, you mentioned earlier, where else are you going to be heading into the end of the year, Doug?
I'm teaching a virtual conference called Church Facilities Expo. That's the first week of October. You can look that up online, Church Facilities Expo. They have a bunch of industry guys teaching different subjects. I'm also, I think, tentatively going to be teaching at SALT, which is another, used to be an in-person conference, but they're going virtual this year too. And then, I don't know, I think that's it for the year. I have to wait to see what's happening next year and know whether or not I have to go all virtual or if there's going to be live events again.
And you're also going to be on the Parkway podcast. I see in your future.
That's right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.